Hey there, everyone. So we are here this week with Marina Byezhanova, who I'll be bringing in just a minute. And we're going to be talking about finding your authentic voice and your own voice on social media. And I think Marina is such a perfect guest to be interviewing on this because she does it so well. And she's an expert in personal branding. And so I'm really looking forward to getting to share her expertise and for everyone to have a chance to ask all of your questions that you're dying to know about how to find your unique voice and stand out from the crowd on social media. So I'm just going to bring Marina in a moment. But before I do that, I just wanted to share her bio with you. So Marina is a Ukraine-born, Montreal-based entrepreneur who consistently brings a sense of innovation, progressive thinking, and downright hustle to everything she touches, which I think if you follow her on LinkedIn, you know this already. Co-founder of Pronexia, a new generation headhunting firm, as well as founder of InfluenceHR and a personal branding architect, Marina has been quoted and referenced in such publications as Inc., Forbes.com, Fast Company, Success Magazine, Yahoo News, and the Financial Post. Marina has spoken to audiences of entrepreneurs and business execs in North America, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. And so I will bring Marina on in and welcome you here with us today. Thanks, Marina, for joining us today.
I know I already said it on your podcast, but your impeccable pronunciation of my last name makes my heart sing.
Well, I practiced again. So
impeccable, makes me so happy. Thank you for that. And thank you for having me.
No, well, I loved speaking with you on the podcast, and I've gotten such great feedback about your episode, which actually I will drop a link here at the same time for anyone who's interested. So it's a little bit long, but my direct links, WordPress didn't update, and there's no way to flip through them at the moment until they fix their bugs. So it's episode 6. You can find it on any of the streaming platforms where Marina talks about personal branding. If anyone's, for those who are watching, I should say, because I know people are, I'd love it if you'd let me know where you're watching from. We have David here from Bellevue, Washington. Thank you for watching. And you can drop your comments and questions for Marina. One thing I want to start talking about, though, Marina, when you talk about pronunciation of your last name. I'd just like to start with that because I was listening to your episode on the No Formula podcast, Laura Bernard's podcast, and you said, because this really stood out to me, you said social media democratized the playing field for people with unpronounceable last names. And I loved that. And it gave me a lot of food for thought because my married name is an unpronounceable last name, but I didn't experience what you did because although it's an unpronounceable last name, it's more of a mainstream unpronounceable last name. And so it stood out to me, the bias that you faced, not just based on that unpronounceable last name, but on the associations that go with it. And I'd like you to speak a little bit, if you will, to your experience. Tell us a bit about how social media opened up doors for you that were closed up until social media became easily accessible way of reaching people.
Sure, a game changer. I love talking about this because there was a point in time where I was petrified of talking about those things, being an immigrant and not being, being Canadian, but not really Canadian. That was quite a long time. So I was born in the Soviet Union, grew up in Ukraine, came to Canada, found myself working in recruitment by pure chance. I graduated in marketing from McGill, couldn't find a job in marketing. Nobody was interested. Landed one interview, bombed it because I was so nervous, and that was it for marketing. How ironic that today I teach social media at a university, right? It just makes me feel like, return of the nerds every time, every time I'm teaching. But so I started working in recruitment. I was working at an agency called Quantum at the time, and I was one of the top performers in the agency. And because it's a large staffing firm, it's well known in Canada, all of my coworkers would be receiving headhunting calls. A lot of companies would try to headhunt them. A lot of other staffing agencies, never me. And I was one of the top performers. Nobody knew that, but I would just never receive any calls. And I assume, big part of it was people, just made an assumption based on my name that, I likely didn't speak much English, likely didn't speak any French. And so that was a part of it. even before that, finding a job just was such a hard process. I started getting calls for interviews, not in marketing and other domains, when I removed my mother tongues from the CV. So then people assumed, okay, well, she has an unpronounceable name, but at least likely she was born here, and that, that was more acceptable. Once LinkedIn became a thing and then became a real thing where we could show who we are, we could, take control of our own narrative. I could show people that even though, I wasn't born here or my name is funky, I speak well, I write well, I have things to say, I have things to contribute. And that changed everything. Started giving me opportunities, allowed me to take control of, as I said, my narrative and my exposure as well, made a huge difference. And that's why something, and also allowed me to build a network. Which is hard, when you're an immigrant, you don't have those. Everybody would get together and start talking about like, oh my God, I ran into a friend from high school, or can you believe it? Like we went to elementary school together, and I always sit there like, I have nobody. And I made no friends, almost no friends, one friend in university, because I felt so awkward and out of place, right? So also allowed me to build a network, which is quite huge.
Okay, so I have some follow-up questions for you, but before I get to that, Diana's saying that she can really relate to this, and I'd love to hear from others who have had these types of experiences. Share in the chat what you've been experiencing if you've faced that kind of bias, and how that impacts you finding your voice, because I want to ask some follow-up questions about that. Ingrid here is saying that she's happy to see us. LinkedIn user, I'm not sure who that is, bringing your whole self to the table. I think that's super important. We have people watching from St. Hubert, from Kansas, from the Laurentians, Pancool. So thank you to everyone who's watching. So I want to get into finding your voice on social media, but I think part of that is just finding your voice, right? And so I'd like to explore a little bit deeper in that journey from working for someone else and that struggle to finding your voice in a context where maybe, I'm going to guess, it wasn't as well received, maybe, and that desire to fit in, I think, also obviously plays into that. But what was that journey like of stepping into your own voice as you grew into, I guess, a new person and who you are on LinkedIn?
It's an interesting question. It's complex because I had always been outspoken. Always outspoken. I just had to suppress it for so many years. That was hard. So growing up in the Soviet Union, born to a Jewish father, meaning my parents would often whisper when they would talk, meaning, just knowing to, keep what I'm saying, keep myself in check, right? So constantly filtering. Then coming to Canada and quite literally, and in retrospect, I was thinking like that's a messed up 16-year-old because you should be thinking about other things. But I was thinking democracy. I can speak. I have my voice. I can express myself. Realizing that when you are a new immigrant who struggles in speaking English, and I had a very, very heavy accent to the point of I would say hello, and people would ask me, "Where are you from?" And I said, hello. I would stay at home. I would stand in front of the mirror and be like, hello, hello, hello. and still, right? Like, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from here. So
I laugh, but it's not funny, right? Like, and that's a terrible experience to.
No, but let's laugh, because it's good to discuss those things and laugh and share those experiences, because then, we don't close ourselves off to those experiences. So it's good to laugh. I'm laughing too now. I didn't laugh at the time, but now I am. But so I found my voice because the society allowed for me to have a voice, but then a lot of people weren't interested in, hearing what I had to say, because they couldn't understand what I had to say, right? So a lot of, back in university, a lot of snickering, laughing during the talks, the presentations that I would give, call them talks, because now I give talks. That was really hard. And so then working in organizations, also an entrepreneur at heart, it was a hard employee to have, because I was outspoken internally, just, not very.
I was that employee too, so I'm chuckling. Yes.
So, when I resigned from my job and I told my boss that I was going to work somewhere else, she was doing everything to keep me. And I said, listen, I know that from the financial standpoint, I'm a strong performer, you want to keep me. But I know that once I'm really out of here, you're going to be so relieved. Because I always spoke about it. There's so much bias and discrimination in hiring. So I always spoke about it. I always came, guns blazing, and like, it's not okay. The client said, clients say, like, I don't want an immigrant, or I want an immigrant. I only want immigrants. They're hard workers. And I'm like, yes, put us in like horses and buggies and we're just going to, plow the land.
Right.
So a lot of that. And then when I started my own business, co-founded my business with a partner, and then started, feeling that, kind of liberty of expression, that was really important. If we're talking about our personal brands, and not just from the standpoint of the things that we say, but how we look, how we present ourselves, right? In corporate environments, there's a dress code.
Yeah.
The first time I showed up to our sublet basement office that we were opening, you should have seen me. Like, I was dressed in like some zebra pattern, strange thing that made no sense, because I could finally express myself. And of course, the entrepreneur allows for that. Social media allows for that. And then becoming more eloquent in English helped gave me then a stage to speak a lot more and express myself a lot more.
Okay. So a question that popped up that I was thinking of as you were saying this was, in terms of stepping into your own voice, what is it that needs to change? Is it society that needs to be more accepting of people sharing their own voice? Or is it that is it from the individual, right? And that process of growing into who you are and saying it regardless of the messages around you? Where do you think the biggest change comes from?
The latter. It's internal. And even when, would receive certain, snickers because people couldn't understand what I was saying. And, when I had a very heavy accent, and in those earlier days, I'm the one that censored myself. I could have still continued to speak. I could have still continued to put myself out there. I mean, again, we didn't have the social media platforms. It was harder to do. Now I sound like I'm 90 years old, which I'm not, but social media is still new enough. No, it's internal. So one, it comes with maturity, right? When you stop caring what other people think as much, number one, that helps. And then number two, I realized it's okay if people think that I'm weird sometimes, or it's okay if people think that, I'm quirky. I've been called quirky many times. Some won't like me. It's okay. Others will like me a lot because they will relate, because I'm saying things that are relatable to them. So no, I think it's all internal work. I think that a lot of people, and this is the most heartbreaking thing for me, I'm seeing how many people self-censor in a society. We don't need to be censored. The government doesn't censor us. We're extremely fortunate. We self-censor and we censor each other, right? Like, we're policing each other. Like, oh my God, Lindsay's homeschooling now. Oh, let me just go and, police that choice, right?
Totally.
That's the problem. And then Lindsay goes, oh, I'm not going to share that, because I don't want this one to say or that one. But that's part of who you are. It's part of your brand, right?
So it's funny you say that, because I'm sure you're referring to, so we were interviewed. I was interviewed this week. It made the front page of the Washington Post. And I said to my husband, do I share this on LinkedIn? It's not really related to my business. And he said, no, it's really political. And then I thought, oh, well, there's my answer. I need to share it on LinkedIn. Not because I'm necessarily political, but it made me reflect on, like, what am I about? And I'm about people having choice, and I'm about inclusion of I feel like the model for, and I won't get into this too much, but the model that has proposed for schooling is a good fit for some people, but it's left out all this other subset. And I feel like somebody like me, who's in a privileged position, can choose to homeschool my kids. And yet I think of all these other families in other situations who don't necessarily have the luxury. And I thought, okay, no, I need to share this, not because I care. I'm not actually a proponent of homeschooling. I'm a proponent of the government giving us choice. But it was interesting. His perspective was, don't stir stuff up, right? That may lead to somebody who might be a potential client not liking you. But the way I perceived it was, oh, well, good, because the people who see that and don't want to hire me from seeing it aren't going to like working with me anyhow, because they're going to see that I'm speaking up about these kind of things. So let's just filter that now. But it took me a long time to get to that point of, that's okay. If people perceive it, then I got a lot of messages of, that's the best choice. And that was not my message. Fine, they perceived it like that, and that's a process. I think I'm still walking that line of getting really comfortable with it. But Yeah.
Because it's hard, because a lot of people are mean. Let's be honest. A lot of people are mean. Like I on LinkedIn have been called a loser. I've been called, irresponsible, vain, like you name it. I've been called it, and, on LinkedIn, that's like people can see your name and where you work, and you're like calling me.
Go to Facebook.
So people are mean. It's hard. It's hard to put ourselves out there, right? So I understand.
So I just want to go into the comments here for a second. So David here, and then we'll get back to a few questions, is saying when he was in his mid-teens, their family moved from Pittsburgh to Kennewick, and he was rather lonely for a while. People in Washington State thought that him and his siblings spoke in a funny accent, and they eventually succeeded to make friends. And so he's saying in a small way he can relate. And I think that's so important because, obviously some people have more significant experiences of not feeling included. But sometimes it's something as small as like the size of your nose that makes you the kid that is, made fun of. And so I do think that tons of people can relate. We've all had these experiences. Unfortunately, some have had them much more.
For sure. And to David's point, he was a teenager, and I was a teenager when I came to Canada, and that's the worst time to be sticking out. You just want to fit in. You want to be exactly like everybody else. Like that's all you want, right? Later in life, we want to stand out, and we have, the pink purple hair like you. I have a strand. Look, we're matching.
I'll get mine done tomorrow. I can't wait.
Right. But it takes time to not when you're a teenager. A teenager, you want to fit in. When you have like a funny accent, and even if it's slight, as he said, and you have no friends, that's so hard. It's brutal.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because my daughter, who's 8.5, very much has the personality of I'm me, take it or leave it. But to be honest, sometimes I look at her and I shake my head thinking like, oh my God, kid, and I have to catch that in myself because I don't want to quash that, but it's so ingrained in me, right? Of don't be that person who's so out there that I have to really watch not to send those parenting messages. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just want to get back to the comments here for a second. So Joseph's saying that as an immigrant arriving in Canada from Portugal and not speaking a word of English or French, and he was learning and making mistakes and being made fun of, it does hurt and makes you feel like an alien for sure. And I think those experiences we then carry into our adult life and into our presence on social media. So can you give us some tips for someone who, everyone here is obviously on social media. You're watching us on social media right now, but, for people who are struggling to, I guess, be themselves and be real, because I think that's at the core of it, a lot of what you're saying from speaking to you before. What are some tips on how to do that?
Mm-hmm. And just quickly to address what Joseph said also, we have also the things that happen. So you feel like an alien a little bit. Yes, you feel like you're literally just completely stick out, you're different. But you also, when you don't master the local language, you feel stupid. You feel that you really want to prove, like, I'm smart. I swear, like you can't get to the end of my very smart point that I want to make because you don't understand what I'm saying, but I'm really smart. So just to tell you, even to this day, so now I'm 38, the biggest compliment someone can pay to me is to say, you're really smart. And I don't care about anything else. So if somebody says, you're really, really good looking, you look great or whatever, or anything else, fashion, I don't know what, good business person, I don't know what. When somebody says you're really smart, I go, yeah, really? And the person goes, I'm sure you hear it all the time. I'm like, no, just say it again. And that's where it comes from. Say it again. So what are some of the tips? Some of the tips of, you mean just putting ourselves out there and
like the real you, that not that curated, we all see those perfectly curated feeds, which look beautiful and are great looking, but then you sometimes can't get a real read on what people stand for, or, like they will not ever rock the boat, right? It's always about, which I guess maybe is the real you for some people, but how do you bring the real you to your social media, I guess is the question.
Sure. So in order to build a strong brand, and that applies to any brand, corporate brand as well, employer brand and personal brand, it rests on 3 pillars. It has to be memorable, meaningful, and likable is the word that's used. I would say relatable, because, arguably, let's say Donald Trump is not likable, but he's relatable to a lot of people. That's why he has a strong following, right? So, right. So meaningful, memorable, and let's call it relatable. And in order to be memorable to people, and in order to bring meaning to people, you have to have a very strong point of view. Number one. And we say that in corporate branding also. We'll look at a corporate brand and say, well, look, what is the brand's point of view, right? There has to be. So if you're going to build a personal brand, if we're going to, create a following, exposure, resonate with people, we have a strong opinion and we express it, as you did with homeschooling, right? Expressed it because you were pro, freedom of choice, and you expressed it, and you get some, negativity, you get some positivity. But people who really support not your opinion about homeschooling, but your opinion that we should have a choice, people who support that, they really support that you put yourself out there and stated your opinion. So point of view is really important. That's number one. Number two, we tell stories. People relate to stories. If I sat here right now and instead of telling these really honest stories, would tell you, well, did you know that 80% of immigrants, experience and 22% could be still interesting statistics, and people say, like, okay, that's interesting to know, they'd forget about me, right? Like, forget. Yeah. However, if I'm telling really personal stories and I'm talking about this, and like, no, I'm not getting any interviews and finally getting one and bombing it, it's a lot more relatable. So I would say, and again, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to put myself out there because like I have an imposter syndrome, and what am I going to say? Tell stories. Just tell stories. You have to identify, of course, what you're going to be telling stories about. That's not just something. It has to be related to your personal brand. But two quick things that I would say: strong point of view and storytelling.
Interesting. Yeah. So on that strong point of view, like one of my biggest beefs with I won't say LinkedIn, but with Facebook, one of the things that has led me away from Facebook is that the points of view are so strong, but they're strong and closed, right? So it's this way. If you don't like it, it's the highway. I'm not going to debate it. I'm going to block you. And it's everything I stand against, right? So for me, it's about not necessarily, I'm not saying we all have to agree and get along and everything's a happy party, because that's not life. But part of what I'm trying to do in the world is get people to listen more and judge less. And so how do you walk that line of having a strong point of view without being polarizing?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So strong point of view is important. Being polarizing is important too, but then it's how you engage with others. Right? I detest Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. I'm only in some like groups because it's like groups I associate with. And the few times that I start scrolling, I get really upset because exactly for that reason. It's the censorship of others that I was talking about, that God forbid that somebody else's opinion. I'm allergic to that. Those people who've called me loser on LinkedIn and other things, I never deleted their comments. Never blocked them. I just left this,
until some potential employer sees it, right?
So I believe in having a point of view and letting other people have a point of view. That I believe is essential. And of course, if you want to also be likable and relatable, which is important for a brand, well, then don't start picking fights for no reason with people, right? Because that's what happens. So it boils down to that. So I'm about, let's say I'm extremely not in favor of homeschooling. For example, I feel like homeschooling is just not a thing. And I write a post about it, right? And that's fine. That's my opinion, right? And you can come and we can discuss it in a civilized manner. I disagree. People disagree with me plenty, and we have discussions about it. If you start writing that I'm the source of all evil and I'm a horrible person and, I should be banned, then how are people like you or parents and mothers, which is what ends up happening on Facebook. Well, that's an issue. You're just there to, to fight, to have a fight, which is another thing I want to mention. You said that when your husband told you don't put it on LinkedIn because it's too political, you said I did anyways, but not because it's political, because I wanted to talk about choice. Point of view has to relate to your personal brand and not just be there, as you said, for the wrong reasons, where you want to just give yourself a badge of honor for whatever your, personal opinion is. That's not the point of a real point of view.
Right. Yeah. It's a trickier line to walk, I find, on LinkedIn than Facebook. I just want to go back to the comments. If anyone has any specific questions, though, for Marina about how to step more into your own voice on social media, she's here now. Take advantage of it and pick your brain. So this is going back a bit. Diana's just saying, I think this is in terms of the homeschooling post, that it's entirely related to my business, communicating with authenticity, and what can be more authentic than asking for the choice publicly. And thank you, because so I've actually done 4 interviews with the media this week. And although there's a little piece of me that's like, I'm not about home, like I'm not about homeschooling at all. The reason I kept accepting them was I thought I am about people expressing their needs. And so anyhow, thank you for that comment. Karen saying, as someone older who didn't grow up with social media or have these platforms at your age to leverage during most of her career, she finds it really difficult and a generational thing to be too open on a personal level. I'd love to get into this a bit more before I go further in the comments, because I think this is really important that I see this, right? So the further we go into the generations, I do see like nowadays the younger generations are very comfortable sharing on social media more openly. So what can you suggest for someone who's not used to opening up?
Yeah, and I don't think you have to. So I think that's a misconception that you just social media means it's your own private reality show and you just, bear it all. But often that's the feeling, right? That like, okay, what else should I be sharing? So I am not on Facebook. My Instagram is really bare. I will post some, heartwarming kids shots, and usually from the back. I don't like showing their faces. So it's like from the back, and just it makes me feel good on weekends. Like I also parent. I don't just work. I'll take this, but they're in stories, so they disappear. I'm like, there's no record of that. So right. I relate to Karen in that I'm not a very private person, but I'm a very paranoid person. So that makes me less open than many other people because I have the paranoia in me, right? So from a different angle. I think that sharing needs to pertain to the pillars on which you're building your personal brand, right? So as you saw, I forgot the name of, it was Diana, I think, that just commented and said, well, of course you spoke about this because it pertains to the things you talk about all the time. So if something pertains to things you talk about all the time, then you post. Otherwise, you're posting when you're sharing for the sake of sharing. I'll give a precise example, and hopefully this will frame it better. Example. There was a big snowstorm. Not this winter, was the winter before. It was one of such big ones where everything closes down. So for Montreal, for those of you who are not in Montreal, that's really big. This is like the US. My sister's like, we got 2 centimeters of snow. Everything shut down. She's in the Midwest. No, it's where like you can't open your door. You're like, I'm snowed in for a while, right? Everything comes down. So like,
I'm remembering that snowstorm now. When you said about the door.
It was just like 5 a.m. All the schools announced that they're closed, and like all the employers start sending out emails like, stay home. So that, and then I get an email from my son's daycare saying we're open. The parking lot is snowed in, so you can park, I don't know, somewhere far and just walk.
Your kids out the window.
Right? And I was just thinking, wow, and it really bothered me. I'm like, it's ridiculous. It makes no sense. Why would they stay open? But my core topic at the time as an owner of a headhunting firm with a lot of company culture work is company culture, right? So I talked about organizational culture. I wrote a post on LinkedIn and I said, I'm sitting at home and I'm just wondering, this daycare that decided to stay open, what does it say about, so it says a lot about how they treat their customers. Right. They're like, anything for you, you come. What does that say about how they treat their staff? How is their staff going to get there? What about the staff that has kids and those schools are closed because all of them are closed, right? So I shared something about, kid story, but it was related. I share sometimes parenting stories and something, my kids said, other mommies do a better job at parenting than you. I've had those, but I make it I relate it. So there's a story component. So again, that always helps. It's not just sharing in a vacuum. And then I relate it to one of my core topics that I talk about frequently. But that's a true story. I did a post about that. That was my most popular post that I shared about my daughter telling me that I'm a mediocre mother in comparison.
So I guess that's the line, right? From not making it reality TV is that you're not just sharing every aspect of your life, which, let's face it, Facebook is a little bit but that there's not at least I shouldn't say, but it's done in a way that relates to the core messaging of your brand is what I'm understanding from
right.
you.
And it depends on your brand, right? If it's a lifestyle brand, then of course you're going to be sharing your outs and abouts, right? So it also does depend on the brand, something to keep in mind. But then perhaps Instagram and Facebook are a better platform than in that case.
Yeah. And I think, so I was thinking with Karen's question too, thinking back to when I used to run a speech therapy clinic. And when I started, I did it in the basement of our home, and I didn't have a separate entrance for the first, 5-6 years. So people would walk into my front door, into our hallway living room, down the stairs. And I hated it because they would walk in, see our house, our wedding photo was sitting on the table. And that to me, and I'm a very open person, but that was like a line too much to have my clients getting to like peek around my house and see what it looked like. And so we eventually did renos to get a separate entrance because I just didn't like that level of intimacy. And I guess, you know, with every brand, you have to kind of decide, what are you comfortable with? And those are questions I ask myself, not even just in relation to what am I comfortable with, but what, you know, I share things about my kids and their challenges, and sometimes I wonder, are they one day going to not want me to have shared these things? And it's actually something I've discussed with them, although they're a bit young to really make an informed decision. But I think we each have to be making those decisions of where is that line of what I'm sharing and what is too much. And, you know, I think sharing just to share because everyone else is, I think a lot of people, probably myself included, overshare at times. And so, you know, I think that's a decision for each brand to make.
Yeah, but you know, I relate to what you said about people coming into your home and walking through it. That's how I felt during the pandemic when we were in lockdown mode. Right now, I'm sitting in a co-working space. I'm not at home. But when I started doing, you know, live streams from my living room, and it made me feel very awkward. And I love my living room. It was beautiful, but it made me feel very awkward. And then people would say, oh, I love your staircase, or like with pictures of your kids. Yeah. People would say nice things, but I would be just like so uncomfortable. So relate to that. We all have our own comfort zone.
That's funny. So for me, who has worked from home for years, but always had the kids, you know, maybe jumping in the middle of a meeting and always being so like nervous, anxious about having to deal with that. For me, the pandemic brought this level of, oh, phew, if everyone's doing this and this doesn't matter anymore. I did that for years. So it's funny, how based on your situation, like all of a sudden I felt very comfortable. I wouldn't even lock the door for a lot of meetings because I thought, if they need me, they can come in, depending on the meeting and how comfortable I was with the person I was
right.
meeting. Yeah. So I just want to go back to the comments. So Lisa's just reinforcing what you said back there, comment on the point of view and not the person. And I think that is huge. And that's where I think Facebook falls apart. And LinkedIn, my experience has been that there's a much nicer ability to discuss topics without insulting people, although it sounds like you've dealt with some of that, Marina.
There's some, but it's such a small percentage. LinkedIn in general does have a much more optimistic and positive vibe, without a doubt.
Yeah. So I'm just going to flip through. I'm going to skip a few comments here. And Karen says she's happy to hear that you're not doing as much on Facebook, as she has similar comments. Yeah, if they would move those groups that I'm on somewhere else, I'd be out there for good. So there's a couple other questions I wanted to ask you about those. So earlier you talked about being confident in who you are and owning who you are, not with those exact words. But a question I have for you is, where's the line between self-acceptance and arrogance in terms of who you are?
Oh, but that's a personality thing, you know, and that's, again, there are a lot of people. So I do personal brand coaching now with people, right? So what we do is we first identify and figure out what my client's personal brand is, and then we scale its reach and help build visibility, network, etc. And so that's such a common concern I hear is, well, I don't want to put myself out there and sound like ABC. I'm not going to say any names, but sound as somebody who is loud and obnoxious, and as you said, arrogant. Won't say names. And I would say,
I have no one in my mind, but I'm curious now.
we might be speaking about the same person. We'll talk about it.
Over, Marina, and I gotta go.
Yeah, let's go talk. But so people will often say that I don't want to sound like that person, and I say, you know what? I've actually crossed paths with that person in real life, because we often talk about like social media and the real life. He's like that in real life. I'm like, it's not this that makes the person, right? So you're just the more you put yourself out there, you put out the real you. There are a lot of people. So again, people will say sometimes, I'm not an extrovert. I'm not a big personality. I'm not, loud like you. So it's uncomfortable. That's not everybody who puts themselves out there and builds a big following. For example, Simon Sinek has a huge following, right? The writer of Find Your Why and Start With Why, but he's more intellectual. When he talks, when I follow some people where when I listen to them on social media, I have to lower the volume. When I listen to Simon Sinek, I have to bring it back up because he talks pretty in a pretty low voice. He is very, he's more intellectual. He's not loud and like Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Like F-bombs and so loud. Very different. Both have very big following, right? So no, I don't think that self-acceptance is what breeds arrogance. Arguably, I would say a lot of people are arrogant and obnoxious and rude because there's a lack of self-acceptance,
Yeah,
so trying to
agree.
overcompensate.
Yeah.
But so I think those things are different. I think that, no, you're not going to appear as a narcissist or as, self-indulgent. You start putting yourself out there.
I guess unless you are, is what
Unless
you're
you are.
saying. Yeah. That makes sense. And I think a lot of it comes back to, correct me if I'm wrong though, that you're going to attract the people you attract based on who you are, and so I'm going to relate this back to sales. There are, as I've gone through like different workshops and trainings and whatever on sales, there's some things I've attended that I'm like, ew, it's manipulative, it's disrespectful, like the communication, the way the communication is done just doesn't sit well for me. It works for them. I don't think it attracts the kind of clients I would want to work with though, because well, anyhow, just so I always come back to that, right? When I'm in my head a little bit around, do I do this? Do I do that? I always come back to, when you're yourself, you attract the kind of people who want that and want, that approach. And so if you are narcissistic and you're on social media being narcissistic, then you're going to attract, I don't know, potentially people who don't feel very good about themselves or whatnot. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know. I'm just grabbing things out of the air here. But yeah, so that's what I always try to remind myself when I'm in my head about, oh, is this appropriate? I'm like, just be you, just be you. And who cares about all the tips and I shouldn't say who cares, because I think it's important. I mean, everyone's listening to you right now learning, but there's a line for me that I think I stepped over early in my business of, well, they're saying you have to do it like this, right? And this is the way you do it. And then I had to come to realize, okay, that's how they did it. And they were super successful doing that, but that's not me. And that's a tough space I find to get to and really own. And you've done it really well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. It's still work in progress. It's still, of course, sometimes, doubt and question, especially when I met, with the big, wave of, saying something people really disagree with. I start getting texts saying, hey, just delete that post. Don't say this, don't say that. Get so much advice. But I do believe that, by really leaning into who we are, of course, there's people that are going to be turned away. A lot of people block me, I realized on LinkedIn recently. I would go to message a person and realize they blocked me, and I'm like, oh, and then is it going to be weird if I send them an email and be like, I just want, it's fine. I'm just really genuinely curious, what did I do or what did I say? What happened? I realize it happens quite a bit. But when you do lean into your identity fully, then people who really relate to you, right? Because it is about being relatable. It's replacing likable with relatable. Then those people really will relate, right? So you'll see, here's my hoodie that I have today. It says immigrant right there, because that's part of my my personal brand story. I'm not saying every immigrant needs to walk around with a thing that says immigrant, but because I talk at a lot of events for immigrants, because I speak a lot about the immigrant journey, I really lean all into it, right? So I'm saying that's what's important, and definitely your core values, right? When you said that certain things don't align with you, other things align with you, when you go to some events versus other events, it's really knowing what our values are and making decisions based on those decisions on company we work for, clients we accept, don't accept, employees, suppliers, all of those decisions.
Yeah. No, I love it. It very much fits with what makes sense to me. Karen here saying, if you're focused on how you can serve your clients best, regardless of what you're doing, that will shine through rather than ego. It's a big part of it, ego? Can you speak to that? Ego, social media?
Listen, we all have ego, right? For sure. I think that for me, I like just talking from more experience and sharing that than, preaching at others. But COVID made me realize how much ego I had and have, made me realize. One of those things was all of those vanity metrics that come with owning a business and then growing the business, right? We had to shut down our physical location. We had to get rid of our office. We couldn't afford it anymore. And so selling all the furniture, going through the whole process, Facebook Marketplace and all that. Also people on Facebook Marketplace, representative of the general Facebook population, who saw everything in the last couple of months. But the thing is, as we were, closing the office, selling the furniture, I kept waiting for that feeling of sadness and, that nostalgia. So I would go to the office and whatever, come home, sit down and be like, okay, I'm just going to lean into the emotion. Nothing. I'm maybe I'm a bit of a delayed reaction. I'm going to start feeling really sad. it wasn't happening. I kept waiting for it. It wasn't happening. And then I realized I didn't care about that office. I had an office and was paying really high rent because I have an office.
Right.
And people come like, Marina, this is your office, and it's so fancy looking. Vanity metrics that are fed by the ego. And I think, one of the things that I realized that a lot of people I'm speaking with realized through the pandemic is how many decisions we make, how many things we have, how many things we do or say because of the ego and not because of what's really, deeply important.
Yeah, I guess that's getting back to aligning to your true values. But I think it is just human to get caught up in succeeding and wanting to do well. I think it's sort of the way we've been socialized in North America, at least. That's been my only experience, but is that's what is seen as, making it. And I think, like you said, social media has opened those doors in many ways to have a presence that wasn't possible without necessarily, getting to the top of a company or sort of attaining it in those traditional ways. And so it's kind of neat to see new venues to be able to share that, what you're up to and redefining even what success truly looks like. I mean, I know for me, it was losing my parents that had me really pause and reflect on. And I still ask myself, I'm getting off topic here a bit, but sometimes I'll still pause and ask myself, if I were to die tomorrow, what's the decision I'd want to make right now? Right? Like, is this, because I'm very goal oriented and sometimes I have to check myself and be like, okay, family, you have a family, like you need to spend time with your kids. And it's not that I don't enjoy doing that. I can just get so caught up in like the fun of building a business. And I know that sounds really crazy, but just a part of it. I know it doesn't to you, but it's a core part of my personality. But it's good sometimes to step away from those vanity metrics and re-question ourselves on the why of what we're doing. And I think it helps us get back to place some more clarity for, finding that voice of who we are.
But, I do think though, still making a distinction, I'm extremely competitive and I want to do well. And I set the bar really high for myself. And I'm also, I grew up in a very, very, very strict family where if I showed up at home with a B, even though I was at the top of the class because everybody else had more than one B, that was bad news for me. I could not. So the bar was always very high for me. And, I'm extremely goal-oriented too and success-oriented, etc. A couple of things I realized is one, I want to be successful, but in my own way. So I realized, what those things mean to me. An office is not important to me. I realized it was only important, turns out, because people could come and tell me, pat on the back, but I want to have a boat. Doesn't mean that I'm not saying that I realized I needed nothing. No, not absolutely not. Just reevaluated priorities and what I actually really want, and there's a reason, and what I don't. Number one, that's important. And I also realized, I became very individualistic for a very long time, just very in my own bucket, my own world, because I didn't have a network. Right? It's like I didn't have those big groups of like friends and supporters, et cetera, et cetera. I thought until COVID, this sounds really weird. It's like a journey in self-awareness, and all of a sudden you realize when I started losing the business, losing my employees, losing the office, pretty much laying in bed and crying and thinking, I don't want to lose my house. Like I just I really like this house. Like I just want to keep this, and freaking out and not sleeping nights. This sounds so silly, but I went on LinkedIn and I wrote a post sharing how tough everything had become, right? So I shared it's tough to be an entrepreneur. It's tough to be a parent. It's like tough. I said the word tough, like, I don't know, tough. And then so many people started messaging me, emailing me, reaching out to me. Like, I realized I was not alone. And that not only did people care, I got a lot of messages like, I'm here for you, you're not alone, you're going to do it, like you're resilient, like a lot of whatever. People started giving me projects and hiring me for things. And I don't think it was all out of pity, but even if some of it was, I'll take it. And so then I realized that, you know what? We can be successful and support each other and help each other and be books. Like I do, for example, career coaching, personal branding. If somebody else does personal branding and anyone wants to see exactly what I do and how I do it, here, it's all here. And I realized that we can grow a lot faster that way than trying. And that's why I say one of my favorite quotes is, your network is your net worth, because that's what makes you really rich. Not when you're that lone soldier, which also works in its own way, but this is just easier, more pleasant, faster when you have other people that support you and, push you forward and root for you.
And that's the beauty of social media, that I find it's a much easier way to build that network, especially today, obviously, without in person. So I will tell you that when I was younger, my dad was like the king of networking. And when I was like 16, he'd be like, Lindsay, you need to network. And I was like, network? Like, I have friends, but like, what is networking? He used to set me up. So I wanted to maybe be like a psychologist or a social worker. And he would set me up with his friends who were psychologists for lunch dates. And I'd be like, oh, dad, right? Like I want to go to dinner with some 50-year-old guy to talk about his job. And even when I built my last business, I didn't really need to network because it was so in demand. And I think, God, if he was alive today, he'd be like, I told you so. Like it took you 40 years to believe it, but I told you so. I told you how
dominating LinkedIn. Like he would be dominating every social media platform and be like, what? I can do that, but at scale.
Yeah. And also I was like, God, if dad was alive, I could tap into his network. Like that would be this automatic, but yeah. So all that to say, I've learned that it's true, even though I was told it for, 35-ish years and was like, yeah, whatever. I'm not wasting my time on networking. I do believe it to be true today. So I'm going to go back to the comments. If anyone has any last questions here for Marina, now's your chance before we disappear, although she's obviously very easy to find on LinkedIn, as everyone knows. So Lisa here is saying that, yeah, so I'd love to chat about this, about how Instagram was experimenting with hiding likes so people would share more without the stress of vanity metrics. And I'm not on Instagram a ton like yourself. I post occasionally. And then when COVID hit, I was like, what am I going to take pictures of like myself sitting here every day? And I don't mind doing that, but it's kind of boring. Let's be honest. I've kind of just dropped my Instagram feed. So I don't even know if that's still the case. Is it?
It's still the case. Yeah, it's still the case. The thing is, you can still like click, because now it says, for example, you like, let's say you like my post on Instagram, and let's say Lisa likes it, and a bunch of people, it's going to say Lindsay and others.
Okay.
And I think in some
no numbers.
No, and in some cases it says many others or something similar to that. But
so then you're striving to get many.
Yeah. Still, if you click on it and you scroll down, you can still see if it's a lot or not a lot. I think, you know what, it's just important for us to not care about those things, and to teach our kids not to care. Have a 10-year-old. I have to explain to her, how many times she's like, Mommy, you did a live on LinkedIn today? Okay. How many, did you get any new followers? How many people liked it? How many people? I'm like, oh my God,
Yes.
So I think that's important. That doesn't matter, because the thing is, at the end of the day, the only thing matters is the end goal of why you're posting, right? Because if I'm getting a ton, my post about my daughter commenting on my parenting skills, it was my most popular post. I don't think I got any meaningful connections out of it. I mean, it humanized me, but didn't get any connections, right? Versus might get something that like barely anybody cares about, but there's going to be that one person who messages me and is interested in, discussing something, getting to know each other, and then it's worth it. So what depends is what matters is the substance, not the right.
Yeah. And I find you never know what those things are. So although I appreciate that, there's strategy and all of that, at the same time, I'm also a firm believer that sometimes opportunities just bring things. So getting back to that homeschooling thing, when they reached out, it was literally like, I don't know, 11:30 at night. And she was like, can we take a phone call? And normally I'd be like, no. Like I'm pretty good with my boundaries. And I thought, it sounds kind of fun. I didn't know it was the Washington Post, though. I thought it was like, local paper. And I was like, okay. And so my husband's just shaking his head at me, like, what are you doing taking a phone call? I talked to her until like 12:30, not because it was about work, because we hit it off, but I really liked her. And, but I felt like it was kind of wasting my time business wise, but sure enough, I've had a few business outreaches from that, had some phone calls already this week around it. And so I guess my point is just, you never know what that thing is going to be that's going to lead to a meaningful connection. And I've had that experience so many times in my life where if I was using that really rational, logical side of my brain, which I, is a strength for me, I'd say, well, based on these criteria, this person doesn't fit the profile of where I should invest my time, Right. But I'm somebody who likes to follow opportunities, and I sometimes do it more based on feeling also. And I've had some really great things come from things that on paper wouldn't really make sense. And so I think when you get caught up in the metrics so much that you're kind of missing out sometimes on those pieces of gold that you can't tell where they come from,
Oh, I so agree with you. Oh my God. You know how many times also from my parents, because they don't understand most of what I do or why I'm doing it. So when I get really excited and I'm like, oh, because life is not only online, right? There's also offline, but a lot of those also things that like, but what are you doing? And I'm like, are they paying you? And how much are they paying you for like the stock that you're giving and this that you're doing? And I'm like, they're not. Like, you don't understand. It's my visibility. I'm like, she's like, are they paying you? You are a mother. You need to be spending time with your children. Now everybody's going to think I don't spend time with my children. I really do. I'm a good mother. I keep mentioning things. It's not going to sound right. But no, I'm a very involved parent. But just to say, yes, a lot of times people say, but why are you doing this? But why are you doing that? But why are you like launching this project or doing the lives or whatever? What do you get out of it? And then after things connect, then I'm like, well, did you see? It's that one. So absolutely. Because
that takes a lot of faith though, right?
As long as you're having fun, it's good. Because if you're doing what you're enjoying, then I say do it for fun. I do it for fun. Why did I go and give a talk at Miguel? For fun. I did it for fun. But then somebody from Concordia was there and they reached out to me to teach a course at Concordia. Right? But the first one, that was pure fun. That was a panel on a topic I didn't dominate. I went for fun. And then things snowball from there when we put ourselves out there.
Yeah, no, I think it's there's different ways obviously about going about building businesses. And I actually, when I started my business initially, had a business partner who was a dear friend, and we'll get into that story another time. And my philosophy is much more like explore, and certainly there's a line of like what I will not do for free and how, I have to maintain balance in my life and all that. But there are a lot of like this whole thing with the media this week about homeschooling. I was like, it's kind of fun. We'll see what it leads to. Who cares? Like, whereas my business partner, we always had to see, it had to be directly linked to a financial outcome. And it's part of what eventually led us to deciding to split, is just our personalities were so different that the way we wanted to build the business was just very different. And so, we went our separate ways and so be it. But I see a lot of beauty in what can come when you just put yourself out there and be real.
Let me also say, this also pertains very deeply to people who are not entrepreneurs. And it's crucial. I'm hearing from so many people right now whose jobs have been affected by the pandemic, or who fear that those will be affected because we're still in the middle of it all, in the aftermath of many things and economic impact. And so I always say, if you have exposure, you have a network, you have put yourself out there, you have pursued opportunities, people know you, you can count on opportunities, job opportunities coming your way, instead of you chasing and going through the arduous, horrible process of looking for a job, right? So as it applies to entrepreneurs, it absolutely applies to non-entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah. And so that's exactly what I would have said to my dad back then would have been, but I have a job. I don't, I don't need to waste my time doing this. I have, and it was very short-sighted, I think, in terms of, I had a job, but that's never written in stone, and especially not nowadays. So I think that's great advice for people to be building your network and spending time. I see that, I see the increased presence. I'm pretty new on LinkedIn. I was about to banish social media forever, and then found LinkedIn and thought, okay, I can do this here. And then I was off of Facebook in a heartbeat. But yeah, I see a lot of people joining and being more active, I guess, realizing that the market is tough right now and wanting to build that brand. Just going to come to David here, who's saying we need to simply work in our own way. When I first made a post on LinkedIn, it was months before somebody liked it. I persisted, and now I have some posts that resonate with people. I don't have hundreds commenting on each post, but that's okay. And it's such a huge part of it. You've talked about this already, Marina, but I think if you get too caught up in, my most popular post was about a parking ticket I got, and I linked it to something. I don't remember. It was quite a while back, but no rhyme or reason to it. No direct link, and then there's other stuff that you write and you think this is the best post of life. Right. And then you're like, what's wrong with the algorithm? There must be a bug because two people have seen it, And so I try to just really be like, man, who cares? Move on. I try not to watch those because I think you can convince yourself that you're a loser and you should get off of LinkedIn. And that's probably the worst thing you can do if your goal is to get out there and in front of people. And so being able to just throw away the metrics.
Talking about the algorithm, and to your point, David, the first post you wrote, nobody clicked like because likely nobody saw it, right? Because how the algorithm works, right? You look at the timeline, at the feed. It doesn't go in as a timeline. You can switch it, but it doesn't go like that. It shows you the top post. Top, it's posts of people who are considered to have, higher authority on LinkedIn. And you can build towards that. It just has to take some time. So those first posts you're writing, it's not that they're not good and people are not liking them. It's just that people don't get to see them because the algorithm doesn't show it to them. So you have to keep posting. It's very frustrating because you got a 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, then it starts building. It's a thing with the algorithm. An interesting thing that many people don't know is that on LinkedIn, only 1% of people post more than 3 times a week. Only 1%. So you see a lot of posts. But if you start posting, let's say 5 times per week, I don't want to scare anybody right now, but if you so desire to do, you're going to start being at the top, right? And you're going to then, even though there's a lot of noise and a lot of people posting, you're going to be in those top, in that top category. Might still not get hundreds of comments if what you're writing is not banal and mainstream, right? You want to get 100. Write about your bad experience with a recruiter and how all recruiters are horrible, and you're going to get 300, so try that. So there are those clickbait posts that can generate a lot. If you're writing something that's less mainstream, something that's a little bit more, in your niche area of expertise, no, you're not going to get 1 million. You're going to get a targeted group, which is great and fine, but at least you'll get a group. Get to that point, because otherwise the algorithm doesn't show, right? So people don't get to see it, and then you think the content's not good. But it's just that nobody saw it. Takes a bit of time.
Yeah. Well, I always think of Brené Brown, who, speaks on shame and vulnerability. And I think, if she was working with coaches and whatever way back when she started, I don't know how long it's been, probably 15 plus years, I would guess people would say to her, don't talk about that. That is not a hot topic. That is not what people are wanting to hear about, and here she is, super famous, really well known. And I just think that she's, obviously refined how she messages and learned whatever she's learned over 15 years. She's a phenomenal speaker and writer and researcher. But I think part of it is she just really stuck to her core messaging and kept at it. Is my gut. I'm saying this just from based on no fact, but it just strikes me that if you find those people, that will build over time. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely. And also the biggest thing is not writing things thinking of what do people want to see, what do people want to read. It kills your own joy trying to figure out and craft something, and it also still doesn't resonate with people. So yes, you want to write on the thought pillars on which your personal brand is predicated. That's really important. But beyond that, you want to be writing. With my family driving around in circles. But beyond that, you want to be writing.
Sorry, we're supposed to be done.
I'm like, is that them? No, I think not. Maybe, who knows? But beyond that, you want to be writing about things that really matter to you. That's really important. People feel that authenticity and that passion, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, people feel that. That's what we gravitate towards, right? As individuals and human beings, that authenticity that really is connected to that deep, message that's within.
So that's a great piece of advice that you're saying. Don't worry about what everyone wants to hear. Write about what you're passionate about. I think that's perfect. And on that note, I will let you go run out to your family. That I'm sorry we've run over because I did notice the time, but I thought this is so good. I'm just going to keep going. So I didn't touch base with you. I usually at the beginning let people know how long it's going to run, because you do it all the time. I didn't give any of my intro. Oh, whoops. That's the wrong thing I wanted to hit. So Marina's website is pronexia.com that you can check out. And you can also connect with her on LinkedIn. And fairly easy to find, but there is her name right there. For anyone who isn't connected with Marina, I encourage you to reach out. And she always has awesome posts, and you can get inspired by how she shows up as her true self in her posts all the time. It's super evident. So thanks so much for joining us again and sharing all of your brilliant wisdom with us. I've gotten so much great feedback about the podcast episode that you've recorded. So thank you for coming again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to connect with anybody who's interested in connecting. The one big bonus of having an unpronounceable and complicated last name is that there's not a single person on LinkedIn with this name. So if you put it in,
Find you easily.
it's going to be me. Thank you so much for having me, Lindsay.
Perfect.
This has been so much
Well,
fun.
thank you. So have a good night, and thank you to everyone who's watching. And next week I will not be here. I'm not gonna take the week off. I will eventually, but I am gonna head off to my sister's for a few days. So will not be on next week. We'll be back in 2 weeks, Wednesday at 6 p.m. And to be honest, I cannot remember who I'll be with in 2 weeks. It's too far off. So keep an eye out on LinkedIn, and we'll see you then.